All new tonight, our border reporter Oscar Margain spoke to one group guiding that very caravan to help explain who's in it and who's behind it.
We're not letting them out. What happens is they would catch and release. We're catching, we're not releasing.
In a renewed warning to migrants in the caravan, the president Monday called on thousands of soldiers to the border and assured that families seeking asylum will not be released into the U.S. Meanwhile, in McAllen, Texas, hundreds of migrant Central American families continue to be released to the Catholic Church, seen here walking to the local bus station to travel to their final destinations. So this is what President Trump doesn't want to see happen. People and families being released. What he wants is to house immigrant families in tent cities during the whole duration of the asylum process.
We're going to have tents, they're going to be very nice, and they're going to wait, and if they don't get asylum, they get out.
This Nicaraguan, who preferred not to reveal his name, says he respects any decision the president takes on asylum seekers. He said he traveled for weeks with his wife and son fleeing political persecution and death threats, so he had to do something. These threats come amid unverified claims by the president that many criminals have joined the caravan, resorting not only to the military to try to stop them, but also vowing to cut aid to their countries.
Nobody on the caravan cares if Trump eliminates aid to Honduras.
Alex Mensing is the project coordinator for Pueblos Sin Fronteras, a nonprofit group that has aided other migrant caravans with orientation and supplies. He assures no one is calling the shots but the migrants.
These are people who have left everything they have behind. Nobody paid them to do that. They have no other option. Some of these people are fleeing horrible, horrible death threats.
About 1,600 migrants have chosen to stay in Mexico, while a few hundred have returned to their countries, according to Mexican authorities, while there's still reportedly about 3,500 determined to reach our southwestern border. In McAllen, near the Texas-Mexico border, I'm Oscar Margain reporting.